Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I'm ready to do my first impressions on this bad boy. This is the Giant Mouse Ace Sonoma, which is one of the Reat built models, which is why I say that. This knife was probably one of my most entertaining unboxings ever, because I opened it out of the package, and then to deploy the knife or open the knife itself, I struggled with ridiculously. I made all kinds of very funny faces trying to get it open, and it just did not want to work. I really, really struggled to get this knife open. So, after I shut off the camera, I let the knife just sit on my desk for like a half hour, maybe an hour. Then I came back to it a little bit later. I had talked to a friend or two that had them, asked if they had any issues opening the knife. One of my buddies did, and he figured out a very specific hand placement to get it to work for him. And then another one of my buddies was like, yeah, it's a little sensitive, but it's not a big deal. This is the most sensitive lock bar to pressure that I've personally ever experienced. Like, if I am putting any pressure at all on this lock bar, the knife will not deploy. So I figured out, since I opened it, that if I put all of my fingers all the way back here on the clip, and then I put my thumb, let me see if I can show you, on here, this side of the knife, come on, and press it kind of against the frame inwards this way, so not on the face of the frame, but on this kind of chamfer here, right where I'm just like barely even slightly touching the blade. If I pinch that with my thumb, put all my fingers all the way down here, in fact my pinky's not even contacting the clip or anything, but I'm not touching the lock bar at all. If I squeeze it just like this, I can deploy the knife. Other than that, if I have my hand in any kind of natural way that I would typically just pick this knife up, grab it, and deploy it, it does not deploy. And I mean, I have other frame locks. I should have grabbed one. I've had and handled an insane amount of frame lock knives. I love frame lock knives. I don't typically have issues with them. For some reason, this one that is the only way that I've figured out that I can get it to deploy. Now, when I'm holding it just like that, the detent still feels a little stiff, not crazy, but it's much less, I think, about, oh goodness, see, it's really, really not intuitive here. It's less about how stiff the detent is, and it's more about, sincerely, if I put a gram of pressure onto this lock bar, it is seized up and it's captive and it will not deploy. And it hurts when it's not deploying and I'm pressing really hard, because this is a really small flipper tab here and it's jimped, and so it's easy to just slip off of it or just dig into that corner there. The comment section on my unboxing video was interesting, because a lot of people commented sharing their experiences with the Sonoma, and it seems like this one might just have something wrong with it at the end of the day, or specifically my hands and the way I grab the knife. It's just a problem for me and it isn't for others. But I can't imagine that there's nobody else who struggles to, like, if I touch the lock bar, it won't open. It's not even like, oh, because I'm squeezing it. Like, just the tiniest bit of pressure on the lock bar, seized up. It will not deploy. So, first impressions of this knife are, I have not been willing to carry it. I will not put a knife in my pocket that I have to focus this diligently and get my hand just right to deploy. Even as a secondary, it's unacceptable for me to have a knife that is this difficult to deploy. So, I don't know. I think what I'm going to do is I'll probably reach out to Giant Mouse. I'll see if maybe they want me to send the knife to them, or see what they have to say about it. I know that the guys over at Giant Mouse are very cool. Giant Mouse has been very kind to me in the past. They've really kind of won me over in recent months. My whole story with Giant Mouse kind of started with me having a not so favorable experience with the Biblio, but they like totally made that right. And then I stumbled into the Grand, and the Grand has become one of my favorite knives. I carried my Grand today on a hike, and I love that knife. So yeah, I'm not going to hold this against Giant Mouse altogether. The buddy who traded this knife to me, the way he holds it, he didn't have an issue with it. And he's a good friend. A number of people were like, oh, you need to talk to the guy you traded it from and make him take it back. Or like, no, that's not what's going to happen here. But this one does feel, I don't know, if they're all like this, then I hate this knife. And a lot of people love it. So like, it is what it is, right? Maybe it is just me. It could be the case that it is just me. And I'm just not meant for this knife. But I have to be so specific about putting my hand in a way that is uncomfortable and weird for me to get it to deploy. And that should not be the case. So, yeah, I mean, when I look at this knife, other than all of that, if we want to talk first impressions. So once the knife is open, right? I think it's gorgeous. I think it looks really cool. I love that this one is the PVD black handles and it's got all these bronze kind of touches on it with the clip, the pivot collars. I think it looks fantastic. I think it's a nice slim profile, but it's got a gorgeous blade on it that's got a ton of length while being nice and slim, full flat grind, and it's a pretty thin, slicey little sucker. Jimping is placed forward on a crown spine in typical Giant Mouse fashion. The ergos are actually great for me. This knife feels really good in hand. It's got a forward choil that for me is usable. This knife should be a winner. And what's crazy too is this one, like I said when I first started rolling, I think, is built by Riat. And Riat is remarkably consistent the way that they build knives, in my experience. And I've experienced a lot of Riat built knives at this point. And so, yeah, it's just weird to me that this one, being one of the Riat built ones, has this crazy sensitive lock bar. And part of the problem is that this knife is so skinny, right? Because there's just not room to put your hand not on the lock bar unless you're literally like holding onto the clip. It's just so skinny. My fingers want to be right here and they can't be. If it was a wider frame, there would be more room to put my fingers elsewhere, but it's just so slim. The lock bar takes up half of this slim little frame, and so it's virtually impossible to not be on it in any kind of normal grip. And if I get it just right and hold it the weird way, then like, sure, it flies out. Deployment is okay. But I shouldn't have to hold it in such a strange way to get the knife to open. To pretend that I do just to be nice would be wrong. There are every other frame lock that I've ever handled, even the ones that had sensitive lock bars, I didn't have to be this conscious of where I put my hands, especially because most of them were a little bit wider. Like my Gen 3 Koenig Arius had a pretty sensitive lock bar in terms of putting pressure on it. My Gen 4, not at all. I could put my hand wherever I want and that flipper goes every single time. But on the Gen 3, it would seize up if I was pressing on the lock bar. But that's a pretty wide handle, and I found that it was pretty easy. All I really had to do was just move my pointer finger. The rest of my fingers were fine. And so, or I guess not my pointer finger, maybe this finger. The next one down. Pointer finger wouldn't make sense because that's the one that I'm using the flipper tab with. But anyways, I just kind of come to up here, and it was a big enough knife that filled my hand a certain way that it wasn't an issue. Here it's an issue because it's like so counterintuitive for opening the knife. I also might find a way to forgive it if this knife had like an opening hole, because then I wouldn't be putting any lock bar pressure. I would just be middle finger flicking it from here. That could work, but like it's flipper only. So when the flipper just doesn't want to work for me, it's a deal breaker on the knife. So yeah, I know a lot of people were very curious after my unboxing whether I was able to figure it out, because it was very unique for me, somebody who fidgets with knives constantly, prides myself on being pretty good at playing with knives and doing all kinds of fun things with them. I have tutorials on how to spidey flick and how to twirl knives and all these things. For me to get a knife and to struggle that hard to deploy it was kind of crazy. So the answer is I've figured out the way to get it deployed, but in my opinion, it's not really an acceptable way to deploy a knife, that I have to put my fingers so specifically in an uncomfortable spot, wrap my thumb into this weird spot where I'm pressing up against the blade, and it's also putting my palm here, where some of the time the blade is skimming against my palm as it's coming out, and it's not normal to have to hold a knife that way to get it to deploy with a flipper tab. Like, it's just not. So maybe this seems a little bit like beating a dead horse at this point, because it has been the entire story of this knife, but it's been the entire story of this knife. So I'll probably do an update eventually, depending on what Giant Mouse says. If it's just kind of the nature of the model, then I'm just going to trade or sell this knife. I'm going to be done with it. There won't be a full review because it would be pointless for me to do one. It will be a bad full review if nothing changes about this knife. Maybe this one is just overly sensitive for some reason. What could be causing that is kind of beyond me. I haven't added any like KPL heavy on the detent ball or anything, but I don't know. This knife was like new in box, hadn't even been carried, and when it was traded to me. So there shouldn't be anything funky happening here. I don't know. I'll reach out to them. We'll see what they say, and maybe there will be an update. If there's not, I'll try to bring it up at some point to kind of let people know what happened with it. But yeah, we'll see. Time will tell. So anyways, this has been the Giant Mouse Ace Sonoma in black PVD. And yeah, it has not gone so well. But we'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks.